We're joined now by Republican Congresswoman Nancy Mace of South Carolina. She opposed the GOP challenge of the Electoral College vote and has called the storming of the Capitol an act of domestic terrorism. Thank you so much for joining us, Congresswoman. Now, you've been direct in calling out President Trump's role in inciting his supporters last week, but you also joined 6 of your fellow GOP House colleagues in writing a letter to the President-elect Biden this week and asking him to oppose efforts in the House to impeach the president a second time, writing, and I'd like to quote you here: "A second impeachment only days before President Trump will leave office is as unnecessary as it is inflammatory. This impeachment would undermine your priority of unifying Americans and would be a further distraction to our nation." So some might argue that the president's actions have been inflammatory and divisive. And so my question to you is, should there be accountability and consequences for those actions? If so, what?
Yeah, absolutely. There should be accountability for those actions from the president on down. And it wasn't just the president that enabled this violence to happen, that incited it. I mean, there were, if you watch the speeches or read the transcripts from the speeches that day, if you look at the rhetoric after the November election leading up to it, especially ratcheting up in the last 7 to 10 days, I mean, someone threatened to shoot me on social media over my desire to, my intention to vote to certify what should have been a ceremonial vote to certify the Electoral College. And so people do need to be held accountable. Right now, in impeachment, I mean, there's no way you can have an investigation or a trial or review evidence in the next week before Joe Biden is sworn in. An impeachment, articles of impeachment, when they come out of the House, will not get to the U.S. Senate until January 19th, casting a dark cloud over the inauguration of Joe Biden. I think that it is a risk to further divide the country. I worry about the peaceful transfer of power, particularly, with the inauguration coming up so soon after this violent act last week. I think that there are other options on the table, whether that's a bipartisan, bicameral commission to investigate. When you do an impeachment, it needs to be done over time. There needs to be deliberation. There needs to be due process. So we've got to be really careful about the precedent we set. Just like last week, talking about the constitutional precedent of certifying the Electoral College, the same thing goes for the impeachment. And so we've just got to be very careful and circumspect about it without pouring gasoline on the fire that already is across the United States, because there are a number of people all across the country that are in severe denial about what happened last week. And we've got to do better. 1, to acknowledge we've got a problem. 2, accept responsibility for it. And 3, figure out what are the solutions that we can work on together in a bipartisan manner to lead our country out of this crisis.
Now, some of those calling for impeachment, though, say it's necessary because the Senate could also vote to prevent President Trump from ever running for federal office again. Is that a valid reason to proceed with an impeachment process, even if it isn't completed before January 20th? Yeah. If not, what's to stop President Trump from continuing to divide the nation, which you say is your concern, and keeping up with this idea with his supporters that he'll just run again in 2024?
Well, I don't think he runs again in 2024, but he only has 1 week left. And if articles of impeachment don't even get a trial, it doesn't get to the Senate until the 9th of January, you're kicking somebody out of office that's already out of office. Censure might be a potential option where you could prevent him from running from office again. But we've got to hold not just the president accountable, but all of the participants that participated in this charade.
Now, what about your fellow GOP colleagues who, even after the riots, still voted to challenge the results of the election? Democratic Congresswoman Cori Bush has put forward a resolution for their expulsion, and she cites Section 3 of the 14th Amendment, which states that no individual can serve in the House of Representatives who is engaged in disloyalty or sedition against the United States. Do you think that any GOP members should face consequences for their vote and for perpetuating the false idea that the election could be overturned?
Yeah. I haven't read what she's drafted or planning to file. That was my question to my own members of my own party today and in the previous days, is how do we hold ourselves accountable? Because if we sweep this under the rug, then the American people are not going to trust us, and they shouldn't trust us.
Now, you also said recently that you weren't going to participate in what you called the big lie that was being told to the American people, that the Congress or the Vice President could overturn the results of the election. But let's just press you on that for a moment, because before the vote, you joined with 6 other GOP House colleagues explaining your views. And in the first paragraph of the statement, you wrote, "We, like most Americans, are outraged at the significant abuses in our election system resulting from the reckless adoption of mail-in ballots and the lack of safeguards maintained to guarantee that only legitimate votes are cast and counted. The people cannot trust a system that refuses to guarantee that only legal votes are cast to select its leaders." So after more than 2 months of court challenges, investigations, and recounts in a handful of states, there's zero evidence of widespread voter fraud. Mail-in ballots widely adopted due to the pandemic, and there's still zero evidence that illegitimate ballots, even in small numbers, were cast and counted. So my question directly to you is, do you feel that you personally have any responsibility in perpetuating the idea that there was something questionable about the results of this election, which on both sides of the aisle, secretaries of state, judges have said this was valid?
Well, it's different in every state. So I've talked with some state legislatures in Pennsylvania. Now, I'm a bit of a cynic when it comes to elections. I think that there is voter fraud in almost every election, whether that's a voting machine, whether that's someone voting with a provisional ballot rather than a normal ballot cast. I've talked to lawmakers in Pennsylvania where they were shut down in state court. They're seeking relief in federal court. They have some, what I understand, some systematic voter fraud issues, but they're not new to 2020. These are things that have been around for a very long time, 4 years. I do think mass mail-in ballots are a problem. We saw states that mass mailed in ballots to voters who were deceased or voters who moved away or registered to vote in other states. These are problematic. These would have not changed the outcome of the election, but they are things that we need to look into because the American voting system is only as good as people's confidence in it. And I do believe that those things have to be looked at and investigated.
Hi, everyone. George Stephanopoulos here. Thanks for checking out the ABC News YouTube channel. If you'd like to get more videos, show highlights, and watch live event coverage, click on the right over here to subscribe to our channel. And don't forget to download the ABC News app for breaking news alerts. Thanks for watching.